thank you. Both of these vaccines were tested extensively during phase 3 clinical trials right here in Oklahoma. What does it take to produce a successful clinical trial? An experienced company and enough willing volunteers. Our state is fortunate to have both. The Lynn Institute has been conducting clinical trials for new medications for more than 23 years. It's what they do. But when the call came from pharmaceutical giants Moderna and Pfizer to oversee trials in a COVID-19 vaccine, the company's CEO considered it a national call to arms.
We found ourselves in what we thought in the middle of history. You know, the potential for these trials is so overwhelming in terms of bringing about it into the pandemic that we felt like we were doing some really important work.
That work took place in both Oklahoma and Colorado. 800 people are participating in Lynn facilities in Oklahoma City and Norman. But the response for volunteers far exceeded what was needed.
We probably had 5,000 people responded who were trying to get into those trials, and we only had 800 slots available. Oklahomans, when there's hard work to be done, when there's a situation at hand that needs the public to respond, we respond, you know, and it's certainly in this case, Oklahomans responded in an extraordinary way.
Oklahoma political analyst Scott Mitchell, an OETA contributor, is one of those volunteers, along with his wife and son.
We're doing this because it's what's best for the most of America. That's why my wife is doing it. That's why my son is doing it. For those who have an ear, let them hear. It's kind of like we were evoking the JFK call. So it just seemed to me to be the thing to do for our country.
Mitchell received 2 injections about a month apart in the double-blind study, which means some participants received the experimental treatment and some a placebo. Mitchell can't be certain, but he believes he received the actual vaccine.
After my second injection the next day, I would say it's kind of like the last week's Chicago Bears defensive line, kind of trampled for about 24 hours.
The overwhelming majority of participants have experienced mild side effects similar to the flu vaccine. Some soreness in the injection area and a temporary low-grade fever. The volunteers will continue to be monitored for 2 years. Is it worth it? Based on the quality of the vaccine produced, you bet.
For the Moderna vaccine to be 94.5 and the Pfizer vaccine to be 94 as well, it's just remarkable. You know, when you compare some of our historically our best vaccines, the polio vaccine is a vaccine that's almost 100% efficacious. The measles is 96% or so. So to have 2 vaccines to be in the mid-90s is just remarkable.
Even more remarkable, the vaccine will be delivered in less than a year, record time. Some vaccines can take up to a decade to be approved. But Operation Warp Speed changed all that.
That may scare the public. They may think that they're doing things different to get it out there faster, but really they're still taking all the precautions and monitoring all the patients and keeping the patient safety in mind first.
Well, of course, ambitious, but this is a huge problem. And I think this is what clinical trials are really meant to address. And in a public health problem, they had to be geared up, they have to be efficient.
Tulsa internist Dr. Renee Mayer helps conduct clinical trials for the Lynn Institute, which is currently seeking volunteers for trials involving sickle cell disease, pediatric migraines, and pediatric psoriasis.
They're compensated for their time, for their travel, and they have access to all the different protocols we use, EKGs, physical exams, laboratory, and all that's at no cost, and then the treatment's at no cost. So once they find out about it and they're a candidate, it's really a win-win situation.
While the efficacy of the COVID vaccine is exciting, one important question remains unanswered. How long will it provide protection against the virus?
We are hopeful that these vaccines will give us immunity for multiple years. That's the unknown right now. That's why the patients who or the volunteers who remain in the trial, that's why it's important to follow them for this 2-year process, because we will continue to draw antibodies throughout that period and see how long they have that protection.
This much is certain. It's a moot point for those who choose not to get the vaccine when it becomes available.
If we don't get 75 to 85% of Americans vaccinated, this pandemic is going to keep on going. Once there's a vaccine available, please go out and get the vaccine.
Scott Mitchell sees it as the only alternative to avoiding a new round of lockdowns.
right now it looks to be our only way out, because Americans, by and large, enough have rejected sound medical advice. My hope and prayer is that people will carefully consider what the science says, what the data says, make the best decision for their family, and ask not what the country can do for them, but what they can do for the country.
Carlos Blanco also telling me that in the 5 to 6% of people who did get the virus after receiving the vaccine, that their symptoms were far less severe than the typical full-blown case of COVID-19.